All right, let's dive straight into this explainer and unpack exactly how utility managers and investors quantify water affordability using the SASB IFW 240A accounting standards. Look, if you follow the infrastructure sector, you already know that managing a water utility isn't just about pipes and pumps. It is absolutely about people, and it's about economics. So today, we're going to break down the highly specific metrics used to evaluate how accessible and affordable this vital resource truly is for the communities that rely on it. The International Sustainability Standards Board has laid out a really clear, structured framework for water affordability and access. We're looking at quantitative metrics and discussion analyses that take what could honestly be a very subjective topic, affordability, and turn it into standardized, comparable data for investors and stakeholders. It's a real game changer for transparency. But before we get into the dense accounting math, we really have to start with this powerful core principle straight from the source material. Reliable, clean water access is considered a basic human right in most jurisdictions. This isn't just another commodity we're talking about. It's a fundamental necessity for life. Keeping this principle front and center is absolutely crucial because it fundamentally shapes exactly why these specific accounting standards even exist and why regulators scrutinize utility rates so intensely. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Defining water affordability. 2. Calculating average retail rates. 3. Measuring residential disconnections. 4. The 30-day reconnection metric. And 5. External impacts on affordability. Let's get into it. Section 1. Defining water affordability, balancing community access and infrastructure funding. Let's establish exactly why measuring this is so critical. The real crux of the issue here is this incredibly delicate balancing act that utilities face every single day. On one side, utilities have to structure rates that the community actually perceives as fair to ensure widespread access, because if rates are prohibitive, it cuts off access and can trigger massive community backlash. But on the flip side, utilities desperately need to secure enough capital to provide safe drinking water, treat wastewater, and maintain this incredibly expensive long-term infrastructure. Plus, they need to generate appropriate returns on capital just to survive. It's this constant, high-stakes tug-of-war between affordable access and financial stability. Moving to Section 2, calculating average retail rates, breaking down metric IFW 240A.1. Now, let's zoom in on the exact math for this first major metric. The core formula here is honestly delightfully straightforward. It's just the total revenue directly resulting from water delivered divided by the corresponding amount of water delivered in 1 cubic meter increments. By calculating that average retail water rate per 1 cubic meter, the entity completely normalizes the data. It strips away all the confusing complexities of different regional billing structures, and it gives us a raw, highly comparable rate. So what does this look like in practice? You literally just take the total revenue strictly resulting from the water delivered, grab the corresponding volume in cubic meters, and divide. But step 3 is where the nuance really kicks in. You can't just lump everyone together. You have to isolate this calculation to understand who is actually turning on the tap. And that's why the SASB standard requires utilities to break this calculation down and report it separately across 3 distinct customer classes: residential, commercial, and industrial. This is vital. I mean, think about it. A major industrial plant leveraging massive volume discounts pays a totally different rate structure and puts entirely different strains on the infrastructure compared to a standard single-family home. The standard notes that these classes should align with the entity's financial reporting, and they even leave room to add other classifications like agricultural customers, if it makes sense for that specific service territory. Section 3, measuring residential disconnections, the human impact of non-payment. This is where we move from the math of the rates to the harsh reality of the billing cycle. It brings us to a really tough but vital question. What happens when those retail water rates just become completely unmanageable for a family? When we talk about affordability failing, we are ultimately talking about people losing access to that basic human right we discussed earlier. And the SASB standard actually captures this through a highly specific metric. The standard requires tracking the absolute number of residential water disconnections where non-payment or underpayment played a role. It defines a disconnection as intentionally terminating a customer's access. Notice that the focus here is strictly on residential customers. Even if a household is disconnected for multiple reasons, if non-payment is just a contributing cause, it has to be counted in this metric. It's a direct, undeniable indicator of acute affordability stress within a community. Now, you have to remember, utilities do not operate in a vacuum. Local policies, assistance programs, and regulations heavily dictate the number and duration of these disconnections. The standard explicitly requires utilities to discuss how these community programs impact their numbers. Because honestly, a utility might have a super low disconnection rate not because their water is actually cheap, but because a local utility commission heavily restricts when they're legally allowed to shut off the tap. Or maybe because robust local assistance programs are actively keeping those families afloat. Section 4, the 30-day reconnection metric, tracking the speed of restoring service. This shifts our focus from the initial disconnection to how long folks actually go without water. We're measuring a very specific ratio here. Out of the total pie of disconnected residential customers, what exact slice is successfully reconnected within a 30-day window? This is the second half of metric IFW 240A.3. You take the number of residential customers who had their water shut off for non-payment, and you calculate the percentage of those who had intentional access reinstated within 30 days. It is an incredibly critical measure of how permanent these affordability crises actually are for individual households. Because reconnections don't just happen by magic, right? They're typically the result of one of three specific financial interventions. A customer either manages to scrape together enough to pay the outstanding bill, they negotiate a new payment plan with the utility, or they utilize a local bill assistance program to bridge the gap. Tracking this 30-day metric helps investors and regulators understand just how effective those safety nets truly are in practice. Section 5, External Impacts on Affordability. Grounding the data in economic reality. Let's zoom back out to look at the massive external forces driving these numbers. Ultimately, water affordability isn't just about a utility's internal cost structure. The SASB guidelines specifically ask utilities to discuss external factors, things like a region's poverty rate, severe weather, and shifting policies, because they fundamentally alter affordability. These are massive influences largely outside the entity's direct control. If median household income drops, or if climate change literally forces a utility to build a new climate-resilient reservoir, which, by the way, can easily run into the hundreds of millions of dollars, those external realities are going to drastically squeeze customers' future ability to pay their water bills. The crucial point here is that utilities have to openly report both the risks and the opportunities that arise from these external pressures. The risks are pretty obvious, right? Higher customer non-payment, regulatory pushback, extreme uncertainty around recovering costs. But there are also massive opportunities here. A utility that effectively manages affordability through smart public purpose programs can achieve strong customer growth, secure regulatory approval for absolutely necessary capital investments, and build incredible reputational value within their community. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to consider regarding the massive responsibility water utilities hold in our society. How can utilities successfully maintain the delicate balance between funding vital, climate-resilient infrastructure and protecting community access to a basic human right? The numbers we walk through today, the average retail rates, the residential disconnection totals, the 30-day reconnection percentages, they aren't just dry accounting data. They are the exact metrics we use to measure how well a utility is answering that very question. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep these metrics in mind the next time you review a utility's sustainability report.